Now,
Well,
George, you brought up a fantastic point real quick. I just want to say that,
go ahead, go ahead.
the problem with modern, like the current WDI, and I've said this before, and this plays into that. They're so focused on the story, and it sounds good. It's a good PR thing. It makes it look like it's tied to Walt and all that stuff. But when you get too bogged down in when you make attractions like Rise of the Resistance, as amazing of a ride or attraction that is, it's very story focused and very specific, right? But a lot of the greatest rise attractions that WDI has created are not really story specific. They're more experiences. Even Indiana Jones Adventure, which is based on a very popular IP, is more of an experience about generalized things that you would experience in Indiana Jones. It's not like a beginning to end story, right?
Or even the original Star Tours, they had a complete Rex. He was nowhere near the original films. He was just a character that was created for that attraction, and there was nothing specific that tied into the films that made it timeless.
Right. It was just a Star Wars experience overall, and Indiana Jones is more or less an Indiana Jones experience overall, and that vagueness sort of it kind of creates a sense of timelessness, you know? Yeah. And that's the problem with a lot of modern rides that WDI creates. They want like a beginning, middle, end story, and it dates it. But go ahead, Dre. What are your thoughts on this, man?
Well, it kind of ties into what I was going to say. I mean, look, I've got Mark Davis's, the 2-book set there. And one of his big design philosophies was, well, doing a story on an attraction doesn't really work. That was kind of his thing.
Right.
It's just not the right format for it. His whole thing was, I mean, he just couldn't get out of this. I mean, he was very kind of vignette driven, right? Like you just have like these side little stories, right? And they're just like these maquettes in the featured in this distinct part of the attraction, or so to speak, right? But he was never on board with like the whole like, oh, we're gonna have like a story from beginning, middle, and end. I mean, from what I understand, he like hated the interpretation that Tony Baxter and the team did for the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland Paris. I mean, he was not like a fan of it, I guess. Alice Davis has been pretty. She's pretty brutal. She's like, they made it all about the bride. It doesn't make any sense. It's just when you get too invested in it, right? If you get too bogged down, I mean, you just lose people, and that's what we're seeing a lot from this kind of WDI. We're just seeing, like you said, OJ, we are seeing a lot of that, right? Previously, back to your point about Beating the Beast and Prince Adam being in the park versus the Beast being in the park, right? It was always about what's the most popular, iconic thing from this, movie or show or whatever, and let's like try to incorporate that into our design as much as we can, right? So it's like, look at Star Tours. You gotta have Death Star run, right? you gotta be there with Luke Skywalker. You gotta have Death Star. You gotta have the Empire and stuff like that. Doesn't make any sense. But everybody wanted to do that, right? Even when they were talking about redoing Star Tours, Tom Fitzgerald tells the story about how, they were showing George the storyboards, and it's like, okay, we're gonna go here, we're gonna go to Kashyyyk, we're gonna go to this planet, this planet, this planet. He's just like, well, where's Hoth or where are the walkers? And it's like, well, that this timeline wouldn't really make sense. And he goes, who cares? Because it's just like everybody wanted to see that. That's what they came to expect from a Star Wars type experience, especially one that they were going with the modern version of Star Wars Adventures Continue. It's fascinating because like when Maleficent came out, you remember the Maleficent movie that came out, Angela Jolie and so forth. Well, there were times when they would bring out the Maleficent walk around that they would have for the parks, normally, and people would go, no, we want the Maleficent, the version of Maleficent we saw in the Maleficent movie. Right. And they'd be like, uh-oh. They wouldn't really know what to do. That just shows you how sometimes times change and they evolve, and sometimes you have to keep up, but other times things are just kind of timeless and iconic, and it's this balancing act you have to do.
Yeah, and Dre, real quick, I want to touch upon this. I made a video yesterday about how, like, sometimes fans and Disney like both entities sort of take things too seriously, and it takes the fun out of it. Like, and this happens so much. I think Star Wars as a franchise is guilty of this more than anything. Star Wars gets so bogged down in canon.
Yeah.
Well, this happened and we can't do this because of this and this and that and that. Marvel doesn't give a shit about any of that. The comics are all over the place. They're just there to have fun, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I'm not saying just throw everything out the window and just have a free for all, but I think sometimes you have to let go a little bit and just have fun. Walt Disney did this a lot, like when he built the Matterhorn, he wasn't sitting there going, well, the real Matterhorn doesn't have a monorail around it. I don't want to ruin the experience of feeling like you're on the Matterhorn, right? It's very much like he just wanted to have fun, and these are his toys. He just want to play with them. And Dre, you touched upon that with Star Tours. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, but to have the walkers and this, that, and the other, who cares? It's fucking dope, right?
Probably the best way that I could describe it is being on with you fellas, a couple times a week doing this. This is like Marvel. We are the Marvel. Then I was part of another, and I won't say the name of it, but I was part of another group of a podcast. They're more Lucasfilm.
Straight in there, huh? Yeah.
Hey, going balls to the wall here.
There we go. Hold on. Let's drop it on.
Up.
There we go. Let's drop it on.
There it is. Ball to the walls alert right there. But no, OG. I mean, you're exactly right, and it's like that's what the most frustrating thing about Galaxy's Edge is. To George's point, it's like, God, I can't get any other characters because we're locked in this timeline before Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. Isn't this great? And it's like, yeah, it's great when you see it like the first 3 times, and then it's like, okay, well, I'd like to get any of the myriad of characters in this universe in here. And it's like, no, we can't. We gotta stick to the timeline. And it's like, well, I'm looking at Avengers Campus over there, and they've got they've got Sam Wilson's Falcon next to Steve Rogers is Captain America, both versions next to each other, right? We've got all kinds of people interacting between each other, and it's like nobody cares. Like nobody, they want to see their characters, they want to see their stories, and that's why I think Scott Drake, when he was developing the stuff for Avengers Campus and all the other Marvel iterations around the world, I think his, or at least his team's big mindset was like, we're not going to get bogged down in the Star Wars, Galaxy's Edge canon thing, right? We're not going to get, it's not going to be locked into a time period. We're just going to mix them all up, and the audience will accept it. And sure enough, they have to a bigger extent than they have maybe with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, because it's supposed to be Star Wars land. And, how do you explain to people? It's like, oh, you're not going to see Darth Vader because we're in this section of the time. That's a tough conversation.
And there was something that I think it was like fan art that somebody made. I can't recall who actually made it. It's like of a park map, like a sort of like how like a Disney park, but they designed it of how they would have loved to have seen Star Wars land to be, and in the center of it, like of how it would be for Cinderella Castle and what have you, it would be the Death Star, and then surrounding it are different lands, but that would be representation of the different planets. So you would have Hoth on one side, Tatooine on another, and I looked at this concept art as far as like from the fan base goes, and I tell you what, that thing looked kick ass. I mean, if that actually was real, I would go to that. And it's like they had like so much into it, and I can't recall who actually made that. I do apologize, I can't recall. But do you know what I'm talking about?
I've seen it.
I've seen it too. Now, OG, do you? I have heard you in the past on this. I think you might have a different feeling about that.
On that concept art.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't too much of a fan of that. I do like the overall idea of a planet you go to where it feels like you're on the planet. I did feel like the concept art felt a little too much like Star Wars Magic Kingdom. But look, in regards to Batu, I am fully supportive of loosening up the timeline. I think that you can have the original trilogy, the prequels, the sequels, and do it in a way that makes sense. And the land is big enough that you don't have to even necessarily have Darth Vader standing next to like, Anakin Skywalker. You can,
True.
You can have them separated. Disney does this all the time. Like they don't have two Mickeys standing near each other at the same time. You can have Mickey Mouse on Main Street and then go all the way to like Fantasyland and see Mickey as well. They're literally in the park at the same time, but they're at a distance where you're not seeing the two together. And I think they can incorporate some of that kind of philosophy and tactic with Star Wars Land. Just have them separate a little bit so it's not jarring. You have all the sequel trilogy characters together, have all the prequel characters together, have all the OT characters together where they're separate out of sight from each other. I think it works. I think it works just fine.
But there was a period of time where they were a little bit laxed with Star Wars. I mean, if you remember like the Star Wars weekends when you would have all the characters come out at once, from different period time zones, you would have the Disney characters dressed as their favorite characters.
Yeah.
And it was like, I mean, now this might be going a little bit too much, but where they had Darth Vader coming out doing Thriller of Michael Jackson.
Oh, the Star Wars hoopla, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So it's like, I mean, that might have been going a little bit too much.
And twerking Boba Fett, that was really good.
Yeah.
Oh my